start with the ones that are online. Professor Usha Raman, who I'm very happy that she's here. She works at the Department of Communications at the University of Hyderabad. Unfortunately, she's not here in person because she's not feeling so well, but thank you so much for still joining us online. We also joined by Mr. Shatakratu Sahu, who's the Director of Digital Economy and TMT, Telecom, you can, Yeah, telecom media area at US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. We also then have here in the room Dr. Rao, who is a retired but still very active professor of linguistics at the University of Hyderabad. And then, of course, you know, our colleague Shubika Salwaja from Broadband Internet Forum based out of Delhi. And my name is Sonia George. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Digital Inclusion Partnership. I'm not going to say much about me. You can look up our work. My role here today is making sure that we facilitate a discussion and that you can also participate with these wonderful speakers to understand better this topic of AI and data governance and how they relate and the importance of them in India, the current developments, and what to look forward from now. So think about some questions that you may have that if there's time, we would love to have you ask. We have a lot of students in the room and a lot of professors, so that should be easy to answer questions. Hopefully a lot of curiosity as well. And we're gonna start with you know, my friend Shubika from VIF, who, by the way, was the mastermind behind this session, who coordinated with her colleague, who's taking pictures, you know, making sure that this dialogue was going to happen. So thank you for being the organizer of this session. I wanted to start with you because you are the Director of Policy at the Broadband Internet Forum, and you actually look at policy from a much bigger perspective, looking at different issues. But as you kind of zoom in into AI and data governance, I wanted you to give us a summary of where do things stand in India right now, what's the current environment, and why do you think this discussion is important for us to have here at the DCS?
Yes. So Broadband India Forum is actually an organization, while a think tank also represents industry. So from that point of view, to answer your question very briefly, Sonia, the main stage that we are at right now is we are facing the India Impact AI Summit. India wants to be a leader in AI today. There is a lot of effort being made under the India AI mission, a lot of funds being invested just to ensure that India builds the right kind of AI for the use cases, for its public, for the citizens. And it's also to ensure that the same is done in a way that is responsible. And because I look at the regulation side of things, it is very important for us to have conversations about liabilities, about how do we look at this sector, which is at a very nascent stage right now. So we do have big techs catering to the Indian population. Most recently, OpenAI has launched several programs to cater to the Indian students. There are a lot of collaborations happening between the big tech, and they're encouraging and enabling startups to take part in building AI, increasing access to open source sources for development of AI. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot happening, especially at the big tech level, and then the effect is seen to be trickled down. There is a lot of work organizations are doing with state governments to ensure that AI is used and increases efficiency of different sectors, manufacturing, agriculture, as well as medicine. So there are use cases across the board. And in terms of why this conversation is important is because we are looking to train AI for India, and in that aspect, it becomes important to discuss data governance, discuss how do we look at responsibility sharing across the value chain, and I look forward to having views of the other panelists on this. They're all experts here. So.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that introduction to the topic. And I'm going to start asking some questions directly to Shatakratu. Not only he has to leave, I guess, earlier, unfortunately, and since we are a little delayed, we're not going to have him for the whole time, but not only to add to what Shubika just shared, but your perspective on India's current policy, especially in the context of the upcoming summit. But since you work in the India-US organization, I think it would be really interesting to also get some of that perspective. I don't think the geopolitics of the current moment are all that friendly when it comes to relations between different countries. I don't want to be provocative, but I like being provocative too. So I'll say that, for example, that's affecting people's travel, is affecting the way different organizations are collaborating or not able to collaborate because of geopolitics. And a lot of it, a lot of the tensions also have to do with questions around the tech sector, right? And AI and the tech sector and the US companies and Indian companies that are leading a lot of these discussions are really key players in these environments. So what's your perspective on that, given that context? And do you see some interesting outcomes after the summit? Or is this just going to be a lot of show and a lot of photo ops and no action at all?
Thank you, Ms. Sonia. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. And firstly, apologies for not being there physically. I think thanks for a slightly tricky question. I'll just begin with the US-India fuel of the time. We don't need to say that the last 3 to 4 months have been slightly rougher than usual for the US-India relationship. Having said that, the temperature between the leadership of both the countries has improved definitely in this past 3 weeks. We must not forget that India-US partnership has been quite strong over the past 18 to 20 years. We were able to chop out the civil nuclear cooperation deal, and on the defense side also, India and US have increased their partnership over the years. The pending bilateral trade agreement and the tariffs are definitely an issue, but I think the ecosystem is optimistic. So the organization I work for, the US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, we are regularly in touch with leadership of both the countries. I can tell you for the fact that we're in touch with cabinet ministers and the leadership of India, and they have displayed confidence in American companies to continue investing and operating in India. And since we have a lot of American companies, including tech companies who we represent before both governments, none of them plan to decrease or stop any of their investments or operations at the moment. Everybody is being optimistic and looking for, just the details to be ironed out, honestly. There have been multiple discussions on the trade deal front. There are some things which are non-negotiable for India, for example, dairy agriculture, while at the same time, US has its own priority for making itself great again, manufacture their onshoring supply chains. So I think the temperature has improved. We need to wait for a few more months. But overall, I think the partnership is safe. So I just pivot to how we're looking at the India AI Impact Summit. I think domestically, Shubika has covered. The approach India is taking. India is not a naturally AI superpower, unlike US and China. We do have our strength in terms of skilled workforce. We do have the potential of curating very diverse data sets with probably Ms. Usha Raman and Professor Now will talk more about. But having said that, I think India is doing 2 things. It's developing AI and it's deploying AI. consolidated national data center policy, where they'll need to work quite a lot with the state governments, because to build up data centers for the kind of approvals and permits you need for land, infrastructure, power, fiber networks, you need to work in tandem with the state governments. So on the policy front, also AI development needs a leadership. And the India AI mission has granted incentivized mechanisms for Indian startups to build its own sovereign AI models. That's on the AI development front. But my opinion is that till the time the AI impact summit will happen, we should not get too excited about AI development, but also take a look at AI deployment. We can use foreign tech, we can use open source technologies, and we should ensure that deployment of AI is at scale and it showcases impact. If we study other countries, for example, China is great at AI development, but it's also great at AI deployment. It has its China AI Plus program, which tries to integrate AI into as many sectors as possible. So at the summit, when we spoke about the outcomes which would be there, I think one big outcome would be India displaying how to deploy AI well. And this comes at a time when India will be projecting itself, as it has been rightly so, as a leader of the global south. Global south countries, including India, don't have the best technologies to begin with. We don't have the base stack, but we are on the application layer of better. So I think as an outcome, I think that will be a great outcome. And on AI resources, I mean, just having access to AI resources, there's been a conversation since the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence in 2023 that there's a need for equitable access to AI resources, which includes data centers, compute chips, data sets. So there should be a collective effort led by India to make a template in which this access to AI resources is democratized across the ecosystem. So just to summarize the three long points, US-India relationship will take a little bit time more, but we'll be back on track. None of the American companies are thinking of stopping their investment on operations. And secondly, on the AI Impact Summit, I mean, let's look at deployment in the short term, but for development of AI, let's ensure that there's democratic access, there's equitable access to AI resources across the ecosystem.
That's great, thank you. Since you are leaving soon, I'm going to follow up with a second question to you before going to Usha and Dr. Rao. But you just mentioned about India leadership in driving a lot of what's going to take place at the summit, including the details of what the outcomes will be. And my question to you is that, do you think that what will emerge will be a framework that is more reflective of global majority countries' concerns when it comes to AI frameworks? Or do you think it's going to be pretty much the same as we've seen, a lot of the leadership really being the countries because of the tech companies, where they come from and whatnot, coming from countries that are driving a lot of the thinking in this area and have more resources to drive and influence that thinking. So the question is really, will India be able, do you think, to shape that new framework, that outcome, in a way that is not just about India, but is really reflective of who India represents, right? The leadership that India represents for the global south, for the global majority world. Do you think that will be possible?
Thanks, that's a great question, Sonia. I think before I answer that, I'll just try to give a little bit more context to the AI summits. The AI summits, this will be the fourth of its kind. The first was in Bletchley Park in 2023, followed by Seoul 2024, and then earlier in Paris this year, 2025 February. And it has been, the approach which countries have taken has been more than their nationalist approach. So the lens has actually been slightly different. For example, in Bletchley Park, with these AI summits began, the first focus was the safety risk of frontier AI models. It wasn't so much to protect and prioritize the companies these countries represent. So and Seoul also, the second summit also focused on that. When these conversations are happening about the safety risk of frontier AI models, which is basically the general purpose AI models, ChatGPT, Claude, Anthropic, etc., etc. The global south countries like India said this is detracting many countries in the world from the conversation about using AI. So by the time countries like the US and China develop their technologies and they move on to safety conversations, countries like India and other countries in the global south have not had to use AI as much. So they said we can continue talking about safety, but we need to talk about more agenda items. For example, public interest AI, welfare applications, and So in Paris, actually, the agenda actually brought it up quite a lot. I think if you look up the website of the Paris CI Action Summit,
Yep.
the very, I mean, the future of work was another agenda item, welfare application, as I said. So India is taking that forward. Now, having said that context, your question is very interesting, and concentration of corporate power for AI resources is a genuine concern. So that is a concern. But India would need to be a global south leader, plus also include the global north in the conversation. You can't go ahead
Sure.
only with the global south, although it is a priority. So I think the challenge in front of India is to make sure that it takes everyone together. I mean, I only said 2 minutes back that India needs to prioritize the policy priorities of the global south. But India needs to figure out a way where it takes everyone together. And one interesting fact is when the Paris AI Action Summit concluded, the concluding statement on inclusivity and sustainability was not signed by the US and the UK. That's not a great sign. Although we must not read too much into it. I was in conversation with one of the people who lead the India AI mission, and he told me that we shouldn't read too much into it, although it's an issue because there were some political changes happening from the US when that non-signing of the declaration.
That's right.
So I think when India approaches February 2026, should try to take the global north and the global south together, and it should try to bridge the gap. I think that should be the approach. How it does it and what outcomes come out of it, we have to wait and see.
Okay.
That's from there.
Great. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate your honesty and openness to address these really tough questions. I know it's not easy, but it's really good context, and I hope the students in the room are learning and understanding that as you think about these global frameworks and how AI is being shaped around the world, there's a lot of influences, a lot of ideas, a lot of not just private interests, public interests, political interests, civil society interests that are, really driving a lot of the discussions. And it's important that you learn from it because as you think about it and do your research, learn to ask smart questions, okay, as you think through these. And it's a perfect time to actually go to Usha, who is working a lot on what it means to have a digital culture. What are digital cultures, right? How are they shaping? Not just in India, but beyond India. And so I wanted to start by asking you, Usha, can you tell us a little bit about your work, your research, and do you feel that a lot of these discussions really fit into the reality that you're seeing really driving how culture is changing? And when I say culture, really everything around the digital society. Is a digital society and the culture of a digital society evolving in a way that is in fact either aligned, disaligned, or completely in contradiction with these other discussions around AI and data governance that are happening at the same time? So how do we bring them together? How do they make sense together or not? So Usha, please.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, everyone for having me. And again, apologies for not being there. Shubha Kratu, actually, your points, are great, and I'm probably going to try and bring us back to the experience of living in a digital culture, right? So we have, on the one hand, really fast-track tech development, and then we have policy that is struggling to keep up and make sense of this. And then we have the experience of living in a world that is increasingly suffused by technology. And I'm just going to draw on 2 examples and 1 concern here to answer your question, Sonia. So, and they may seem quite disparate, but hopefully I'll be able to bring them together. So many of you may have heard of the protests that happened earlier this year by students at my university, actually talking about the destruction of forest cover near the University of Hyderabad. And the protesters used a series of memes, very evocative memes to make that point, some of which were picked up by media, they just went viral. And some of these images and videos we found later to be AI generated. Something that, for a while called into question the integrity of the protest space. So the images were used to make a point, a good point, and the point itself was valid, but the means of making that point use digital cultures, which are intricately tied to the tools and affordances of publicly available platforms, which are more and more embedded with AI, imbued with AI. So we need to think through these connections, I think, more clearly and feed those understandings back into literacy programs on the one hand, but also place some responsibility on platforms for limiting use cases and also on regulation to insist on marking out human-made versus machine-made products. And I think to some extent now there is intervention on this count that all media, for instance, have to label images that are AI generated, but that's just a small intervention. So the second example I'd like to bring out, or the second area of concern, has to do with the labor that goes into building data sets and deploying AI, right? And there has already been quite a lot of conversation on how do you make data sets inclusive, but how do you also make data sets in inclusive and ethical ways. So there's been some attention brought to this by journalists. The Henbox, for instance, has an excellent series on ghost work, and Karishma Mehrotra, a journalist, has also talked very incisively about what data labor looks like. And it's not pretty, right? So I think there's a big concern around whether India, countries like India, the global south, will actually become the back-end offices of AI and therefore become modern or high-tech sweatshops. And there are two sides to this, of course. There is a huge amount of job generation, but what those jobs look like in practice, I think, requires to be thought through. So I think there's a lot we can learn from the experience not only of using AI, but creating AI and the complete value chain. So, and again, I would like to shift the question from value to fairness. And this is a very difficult shift to make, I know, in our market-driven sort of society. And I'll just start with one last point, which stems from a set of studies that we did with Digital Futures for Children at the London School of Economics, where we spoke to young people aged 13 to 17 around their use of Gen AI, in play, in work, in leisure. And we find that there is an overwhelming normalization of AI into their lives. And so I think what we need is, in education as well as regulation, stepping away from a completely techno-utopian understanding of AI and thinking about some of these questions critically, particularly because of the embedding within our everyday tools.
Thank
So
you.
I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for that contribution. So interesting, so many interesting points there. And it actually is perfect segue to Professor Rao because, you both started at kind of, a higher level, you get into more the cultural issues and continuing with culture and digital culture, linguistics and language is a critical element of what it means to have an identity, to maintain that identity, that culture, etc. And you've done a lot of work. This is your area. Is the work that you are seeing, Usha just mentioned, for example, young kids, right? And how they are using AI in their digital lives. What is the role of language in this new environment? And not only from the perspective of how a lot of linguistic groups are being excluded, but also is it changing the way young children are interacting with their culture? Is it changing the way culture is evolving here in India and elsewhere? Tell us your perspective, what your experience we can learn from it. I'm sorry, before I pass on to you, Shatakratu, if you need to leave, we understand. We really appreciate if you can stay a little longer, but if you can't, don't worry. I don't want you to worry about interrupting, so feel free, and we truly appreciate you being here. If you can stay, fantastic. And follow up, because I wish you could be here. Great discussions happening in this space. So, Professor Rao.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Actually, we professors, when we look at the auditorium with students, we are very much excited, thinking that we can give 1 hour lecture to them. Okay, I think Sonia won't allow me to do so. So that's why I will.
Not a full lecture, a mini lecture.
Yeah, I will be as short as possible. Yeah, actually, when we talk about AI, data governance and policies, the question is how to create quality AI, number one. Number two, how to develop responsible AI. Number three, how to develop inclusive AI. Okay, these are the questions that we are encountering. And in all these three issues, aspects, language and culture play a significant role. Why? Because actually when we talk about the data collection, data analysis and data implementation, here language plays an important role because the data that you collect, it is in the language, any data. So that's why I always say that language is as important as oxygen. Because as long as we live, we think, we speak. So as long as live, we have to take the oxygen. So language is as important as oxygen. That's why the data actually is in the language. And the language analysis becomes very, very important. So that's where linguistic aspect of AI comes into picture. Number two, if you want to build a responsible and inclusive AI, you have to take both linguistic and cultural aspects. Why? Because if you build AI in local languages, if you have the culture included in the AI, it is easy to solve local problems. And once the AI is in local language, with the local cultural background, it will be an inclusive AI, isn't it? So that's why cultural data sets, language data is very much important. So when you talk about language and linguistics, there are, while collecting the data itself, linguistic data, there are quantitative, qualitative methods are available. You can get the data. There is no problem at all. And while analyzing the data also, many linguistic methods are available, scientific methods are available. The cultural data sets have to be analyzed from the socio-cultural anthropological point of view. Okay, so what this says? This says that if you want to really build a responsible AI, an inclusive AI, it is not the technologists that can do it only. There should be social scientists and technologists, they should work together to really build a quality AI. Then only you can improve the quality of the AI. Okay, so that's why if you take the AI policies, basically UK, US, China, etc., these are the 3-4 countries which have come up with the European Union. Most of these policies, they are either industry-centric or domain-centric. So cultural aspect has been either ignored or given very less attention. So now the time has come. If you want to build a really ethical AI, you have to take into the consideration the cultural aspect. Otherwise, you cannot do it. So, even in the AI Quality Summit or because we are also from time to time redesigning the AI policies depending upon the technology development and other developments. So now the time has come to give equal importance, equal significance to both technological aspect of AI and socio-cultural aspect of AI. Why I am talking about the socio? Because any technology has impact on the society, on the human beings, right from the mobile technology. So we have already experience with the mobile technology. It's if you overuse or misuse or maliciously use it, what will impact it will have on the society. So we have also now feeling the impact of AI now. So now the time has come to control this. So that's why while building the AI system itself, if we take care of socio-cultural aspect also, then our AI, whatever the purpose you have developed the AI, will be effectively implemented. That is my contention.
Thank you. Very interesting. And I think we have to come back to Usha to follow up on that because it only makes sense. Usha, from your research, and I think this is really important contextualizing in two ways, both from an inclusion perspective, and you do a lot of work in that space as well, but also, I would say from an inclusion perspective that has a very feminist-centric approach to it. And I say feminist because feminist methodologies are central in creating equity, equality, and inclusive systems. And so, can you tell us what do you think, and not just what do you think about what Professor Rao just shared, but how are you seeing this playing out when you do research with communities, being young people or older or what have you, in digital spaces? Are these issues relevant? Is language that relevant or not? And I'm saying this because I think that they are very relevant, but often we start questioning, right? Is our culture relevant? Is culture changing so much that we have to accept a kind of change that may not necessarily be what we would like to, right? So tell us what you think about it, especially from an inclusion perspective. And Shatakratu, I'm going to come back to you after, because I want to see if we can link that in those questions and what Usha is going to share with us to some of the work that then happens at the policy high level, right? So think about that as you listen. Usha, to you, and then we'll come to you, Shubika, after. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think, people who are on the margins and using these technologies are very aware that they hit roadblocks when it comes to language, for instance. So some of the young people we spoke to who have started using ChatGPT, let's say, in ways that are actually empowering them in overcoming language hurdles, find that the same facility that allows them to overcome language hurdles also has a limitation because it's not able to say exactly what they want to say because the models are largely Anglo-centric, right? So when a young student who works primarily in Hindi or Urdu wants to write something and puts his work into the model, what he gets back is not exact. There's a refraction there. So I think young people, particularly those, I'd say, 15 to 17-year-olds who already have some critical understanding of the world, are quite conscious that the models don't exactly reflect their experience of language. So language is just one aspect of it. There are also other forms of representation, imagery and so on. So, so I think the experience of even the rudimentary AI models that we have right now as being not inclusive is very much there. And how does one address it? I think there are, if any of you have watched the film Humans in the Loop, you probably would have seen an example of how one might address these issues of representation and bias. But it's not that simple. I mean, the kind of models that were sort of alluded to in that film are small language models, localized databases. So when you compare what's available on a localized, fairly controlled database with what a large language model might examples that they have used to create small language models which could address some of these issues. Models that are localized, that don't use the same level of resources, but address local needs. So I know that that's not a complete answer, but I think we'll have to find a way to bridge the gap between a sense of the local and the affordances of the global. And one other area, and you talked about feminist principles, I think a hugely generative set of principles that I have come across are, Catherine Dignazio and Lauren Klein's principles of data feminism. And they actually have offered examples of how we might move from, a concern over competitiveness to a concern towards fairness. And again, I think if these are easier said than done, and I don't know that I have the answers, but I think feminism has the answers. The problem lies in not having the power to move that discourse into larger policy circles.
Great, thank you. But we have a room full of students, and they are the generation that can change that. So be the smart students, thinkers, analysts, because you have the power to do that. However you use technology, you can shape how a lot of these is going to look like, right? A decade from now, 2 decades from now, and beyond. If anyone has any questions, raise your hand so that I can start trying to see if I can bring you in. If not, that's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any questions, raise your hand so I know. And Shatakratu, I wanted to come back to you now and ask you, so how do you see, and you're seeing this discussion, connecting the local to the global is really difficult, and Usha made the point very clearly with her intervention. I mean, I think people like you and others that are involved in the summit have a huge responsibility to bring so much, right? How do you prioritize what's important for these declarations and outcome documents? Give a flavor of that, not just to us who are interested, but to the audience here in the room that are learning how these things shape. How are we determining their experience in the near future based on the work that you're doing in the summit, right?
Sure, thanks, Sonia. I think the conversation is moving quite well, and we've covered some ground. And firstly, that identifying the representative AI is a necessity. I mean, it's not a question of whether or not, it's a question of how now. Before I make a comment on representative AI, I just want to conceptually, although representative AI is a priority, representation of local context will not necessarily translate to ethical and responsible AI. One thing is to make data sets representative, but then there's a whole chain of things you need to get in order to ensure that the AI is ethical and responsible. For example, we may have a representative data set to train an AI model, let's say for Indian agriculture, but we need to look at the whole AI value chain, who develops AI, who deploys AI, users also. So that's just something to keep in mind, that representation does not equal to necessarily ethics and avoiding bias. Now moving on to, I think that's just to be aware of what the Indian government is doing for including language translation. There's a dedicated mission for the past few years. I don't know exactly how long, but there's something called the Bhashini mission. It sits under the Indian IT Ministry, and there's some really good work they've been doing on language translation. A lot has been done there. Secondly, there's a geopolitical priority to build sovereign AI models, basically, and India is also doing that. And for that, the Indian government has released a data sets platform. It's called the AI Coach platform. It's publicly available also. So those data sets are also trying to ensure that there are representative data sets. And I think we should also understand that the big tech and companies who are building AI models need no convincing that they need representative data sets. They are also fully aware of the fact. Without naming any companies, there are AI models out there who are giving us free access to their AI models for some time. That's primarily to analyze how we use their models, and because this is one population set which wasn't considered when the big large language models were something which should be readily available for these AI model developers. One market incentive is publicly available data sets, which was exempt from the DPDPA Act. I'm still analyzing the rules which came out a couple of days back. But I think, if I'm not wrong, then publicly available data sets is something which they can train their models on, and that won't come under the obligations under the Data Protection Act. I think there's a need to figure out more such amount of data sets or translated data sets from the local context which the AI models can be trained upon. And that's where I think some hard thinking needs to happen for just incentivizing these companies to use it. In terms of the AI summit, it will be a tough one. I mean, what we think of in terms of local, culturally relevant data sets being used by AI models, because I mentioned this earlier also, maybe being repetitive, but access to AI resources it's slightly more on priority, I would say. In my analysis, I mean, access to compute, for example, is a major priority, because if you don't have the compute, you're unable to train your data sets. So I'm sure the India AI is taking into account having representative data sets available for AI model development. But we should be aware that we will need data centers, we will need compute chips as well, and we will need some sort of open source technology to train these models on. So there's a huge universe of things in which we need to prioritize this imperative. In terms of what would be best, I think, and now just coming back up to ethics and bias, I think governance of AI is a good priority. The Indian government will prioritize that. It will just be validating tools which we should push also refer to a while back. We have also released AI development guidelines first in January earlier this year, and now on 5th of November there was a report which was released. The idea is pretty simple there. It's basically India will be taking a pro-innovation regulatory approach. This is quite an abstract term, but what it means is that it will try to ensure minimization of harms, but at the same time, it wouldn't want to do anything that disincentivizes technology companies to operate in India. So that is it, and that is the approach they're taking. One major governance approach that India is taking is to not bring in any new AI-specific law. So nowhere in the near future will we see anything like the EU AI Act or anything from around the world, but we will see targeted amendments. The IT labeling rules are targeted amendments for transparency, for example. So you will see that. It's just a difficult space to keep the prioritization.
Right.
So I'm not answering all questions, but
No, I think you did a really great job, and thank you, both of you. I mean, I think that's precisely, I think, the kind of understanding, including those complexities, right? It's never a clear answer, and policy processes are very long. Often we work on specific objectives for years and years. We're thinking about them now. We only see the fruits of it 5 years down the road, but it's precisely creating and carving these paths, these trajectories that are informed by what we see through research, through our thinking, through our experience, that then help us create better policy as well, right? So even if it doesn't happen in this summit, the fact that you are already thinking about it and thinking about the ways these will come through, that's really important. It's all these different steps, and I'm posing the discussion in that way because I think for the audience that we have here in the room, I think that's really important to understand these, short, medium, and long-term approach to what policymaking looks like, right? And, AI is defining so much of what we're doing in the digital space that it's important to learn that perspective. Even if it may feel very frustrating right now, it's something to look forward a few years from now and to stay involved. So, Shubika, you work for BIF, the Broadband India Forum, that represents a large number of industry players here in India. So how do you see all of these themes coming through, especially in regards to these legal and policy instruments that have been issued by the Indian government and that you've been studying and working on? how do you bring it all together and help these audience understand what they mean for themselves here in India, but also as the new generation that is going to be working in a space that is very much shaped by these decisions?
Thank you for that question, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. Shatakratu very clearly pointed out that the approach of the government is clear. It has to be pro-innovation. For the industry, it has to, to reflect fairness. It has to be pro-competition. It has to allow access to resources. It has to allow access to different kinds of infrastructural as well as deployment-related resources to be able to reach the masses, to be able to actually effectively and efficiently enhance productivity and benefit the economy. However, one challenge, so to speak, one sees when policies are being formulated is that there is a bit of a mismatch between what is idealized in short-term, medium-term, and long-term sort of stages. And especially in the short term, when we are looking to address specific risks, because that is the idea, to address specific risks and take a targeted approach, we may sometimes overlook what the effect of that particular regulation would be, and it may sometimes be framed in a way that it ends up becoming a checkbox exercise. And I think that is something that must always be avoided, because an industry which wants to grow needs to look at the people, needs to look at the consumers it's serving. And if it has to do that in a responsible way, in an ethical way, while the facilitation from the government is important, it is also important to recognize the measures that the industry is taking. And I think in the AI governance guidelines, which the government has recently released, it has taken into consideration the fact that a lot of the measures for risk mitigation in this whole ecosystem of AI has to be voluntary. So while that is on the industry side of things, it has to be voluntary, and that must be encouraged. That momentum must be maintained by the government, that it is best efforts based, it is in a reasonable manner, and it is targeted. On the side of consumers, I think there is a need to thrust awareness on how one can use these systems to enhance productivity, while also ensuring that the use is done in a responsible and ethical manner. For the most basic example, over-reliance and cases such as which have happened in the US, the character AI case, for example. Those are scary examples, but awareness is important. So incident monitoring is important, responsible reporting is important, and feedback from users is important to be able to inform policy, inform even the measures that the industry takes. So just closing in on how these laws affect us, I think it's important to sort of be aware of developments, be aware and be mindful of what one is seeing today, right? Like everything, just the examples which have been quoted a few times, which is a lot of the material that we see on the internet, information that we see on the internet may be synthetic or may be AI generated. So essentially for students here, for everyday ordinary citizens, it's important to ensure that what one sees, one verifies, and one is able to always go back and see what can be done to improve such use cases and improve policy there. Yes.
Thank you. That's great. So I hope you are all understanding clearly the discussion and the different perspectives. And one thing for me that is very clear, that there's a massive contradiction with so many of these points, right? Especially a contradiction between, what's good and better and more exciting for industry and what is the public interest. and what is the responsibility of public policy and decisions that happen at that level. And it doesn't have to be a contradiction always. It doesn't have to be in tension. Tension sometimes is good because it puts pressure for things to happen the right way. And I think this is one of those moments, right? That the tension that is happening in these discussions hopefully will lead to better outcomes. There will not be agreement on everything. But I think that it's important to recognize that contradiction, because one thing that we heard yesterday at the end of the last session, I don't know if all of you were here, Anita Gurumurthy from IT for Change made the point that it's time, because of the way our sector and digital technology is changing our lives and it's becoming so important for our lives, it's time to start thinking about digital goods as public goods, just as public health, just as public education. And because of that, have a treatment of those services and products and what have you from the perspective of a public interest and a public good, right? And I think that's really hard, because more so than any other sector, there's never been so much private sector involvement, right? Education, there were always private schools, but there were a lot more public schools. In health, there were always private hospitals and clinics, but a lot more public, right? In the digital sector, is totally the opposite. Public is small. In like 3 decades or 40 decades ago, it was very much a public sector, right? Before really what we call digital, before the internet. But once things changed, they became primarily a private sector-driven industry, right? And so that is very different. So it's going to take a lot more work to really balance those. And I think for concerns like the ones that you expressed on linguistics and culture, it's going to be even more challenging, right? Because you're farther and farther away from that possibility that you were trying to aim to. So I'm going to close by starting to ask Dr. Rao for his impressions on everything that you've heard. Is there hope for culture? Can we think about, in the words of some of, I mentioned Payal Arora yesterday, Usha, who you and I are involved and follow a lot of the work. You involved with the lab as well. And her thinking is going from pessimism to promise. Can we really be hopeful and see the promise, or are we in doom, right? So let's start with that for you, and then I'll ask Usha, Shatakratu, and Shubika to think about a 30-second word to end. He has to leave? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Shatakratu, do you have to leave? That's okay. So do you want to just say a 30-second word for everyone in the room before you disconnect?
Yeah, and one point is just to be aware of all the elements involved in AI development and deployment. Sometimes we get caught up in singular discussions. And second is representative AI and ensuring there's no bias in the data. So it's a very, very good step. So we need to continue working on it for the long term, even if you don't see the result. Because that's the first step of AI development. So that's important.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being with us as long as you could. Really appreciated your intervention. Thank you. So back to you.
Actually,
yes, go ahead.
Actually, the sustainability of the technology and relevance of the technology is only when it becomes the part of the culture. That's why we are now talking about the digital cultures, because digital technology has become part of our culture. Yeah. And there is actually no contradiction, because the technology, here the question is whether the technology should be the industry-centric or people-centric. Okay, the why mobile has become so popular and relevant because this technology is consumer-friendly. Otherwise, you won't use it. So like that, The AI models, the AI that we develop, entire ecosystem of AI should be contextualized in terms of local cultures and languages. That's what India is doing now by developing, you see, AI models for translation for tribal languages. I think this should continue. This
Thank
should
you.
continue.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Usha, last word, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. So I would actually echo more what what the speaker said in terms of we need to really think about frameworks in a layered way, and we have to look at the entire AI chain, right from where it is developed, what is the data that goes into it, and I think one of the things that's missing from a lot of our conversations, which was mentioned, was compute power, and how compute power itself is not an apolitical question, right? So where you're locating data centers, whose land is being used, what would that land have been better used for, who is it going to serve, which markets are going to benefit from it. I think these are questions also that we have to ask. So, I think we need to really look at the entire layer, both the inputs as well as what we're extracting in terms of natural resources, human resources in building this AI-driven initiative.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And thank you all for being here. We have to close because we are very late, as you know, and lunch is waiting for us, for many of us. So I want to thank all of you, those online and here present, and thank you especially to the colleagues from BIF for organizing. Really appreciate. It was a nice discussion, and I look forward to continuing. And for the students in the room, as well as others, not everybody is a student, stay engaged, stay curious, ask questions, feel free to reach out to us, go on LinkedIn, make sure you connect with everybody that you want to learn from. Don't be shy. You're going to shape the world, and never, never be shy. Go for it, okay? Thank you all.